I just completed doing a whole bunch of service work and repair work on my 300 TD wagon. This included replacing the radiator. It included replacing the upper and lower radiator hose, the coolant reservoir hose, short hoses. We got in here and I had to replace the thermostat housing here because there was some corrosion on it where the short hose is. So you can see I did kind of a major service on the cooling system, and I've just added new coolant, and guess what I'm going to do now? Before I take it outside and start running down the road. I am going to do a pressure test on the cooling system. You know, anytime you do this kind of work on an old car like this, where you're putting a lot of hoses on it, tightening a lot of clamps, it's really easy to miss something, and a pressure test will show up right away. We'll have coolant running on the floor if we forgot to tighten something. But this is really a good test, particularly if you've done something major like this and you're planning on taking the car on a trip. So in order to complete this pressure test, I'm going to use my brake bleeder tank and hook it up to this adapter, and we're going to pump up pressure and see how this turbo diesel's cooling system performs. Since I also use my pressure tank for brake bleeding, because I did brake service work and replaced a lot of brake parts on the same car and flushed the brake fluid system with this tank, I removed the pickup hose because I don't want any brake fluid getting into the cooling system. Along with removing this pickup hose inside here, I pumped up pressure and made sure there was no residual brake fluid in this hose here. Now I can just hook it right up to the adapter, and now I'm going to adjust the tension on the cap, and I do that by loosening up the cap. I can screw this in a little bit and then tighten the cap down. Okay, a little bit more. Okay, that feels pretty tight. I'll straighten that hose out a little bit. All right. Now let's start building pressure. For a cooling system test like this, if I get up to 15 psi, that's the max. So I usually do my test around 12 psi. Once you get up to about 8 to 10 psi, if you have any kind of a leak, oh boy, look at that, I've got a leak. No! I've got coolant pouring on the ground. Uh-oh. Wow, where is that coming from? Okay, it's coming out of the hose, coming out of the water pump housing. All right, look at that. Let's watch the pressure. Pressure's coming back down, so I'm going to go ahead and release pressure. So you see, even I can make a mistake. I've got a clamp down here at the water pump housing that I forgot to tighten. And can you believe it? It was not leaking coolant on the ground. But once I applied pressure to the cooling system, okay, so the moral of the story is if you're going to do a test, put something underneath the car in case you have a leak. Fortunately, I have a pan down there. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten this clamp down, and we'll come back and redo the test. There's the clamp right there. All right, we'll get that one tight. I know these are tight. Go ahead and check this one too. Yep. And I can check these two clamps on the short hose just to be sure. Yeah, that one's tight. Okay, now we're ready to test this cooling system again. And by the way, I'm going to recommend do not completely fill the cooling system with coolant before you do this test after extensive cooling system work. I think I don't need to explain why. Okay, let's put the cap on. I'm just going to adjust the tension a little bit. Okay, it's nice and tight. And I can plug in the pressure tank. Okay, let's pump it up. Now when you fill the cooling system just partially with coolant, you may get a little drop in pressure initially because you've got things moving around inside the cooling system. I'll bring this right up to 12 psi, and then let's see how it stabilizes. I'm looking down in here. I don't see any coolant dripping on the ground. And look at that. It's holding steady at 12 psi. Now, if you're testing for a possible head gasket leak, you might want to leave this on for 15-20 minutes to come back and see if it'll continue to hold. But as far as just testing for coolant leaks, this looks good, and I'm ready to take this car off the lift and take it for a test drive. You can see that's a pretty easy test, but it can save you a ton of grief. Because if one of those hoses pops off while you're driving, you could literally fry the engine.